Alright, sorry about that, my friends. What the heck is this? Okay. Just as a reminder, this channel is for educational or perhaps entertainment purposes only, whichever the law would prefer. It's always important to do your own research and come up with your own conclusions. Okay, so, hello everybody. It's good to see you. Hope you're all doing well today. Happy Sunday. Hope the weekend's treated you all well. Welcome back, Lawrence. Great to have you in the Last Timers Club. Trillin, welcome as well. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. It's greatly appreciated. And everyone else who is a member, appreciate you. And everyone watching today. Okay, so we're going to pop right into this. And I've got a near-death experience from what I see, what seems to be a doctor. And the name is interesting. Dr. Phil, which I believe would maybe be Phyllis. Magdalene Bless. She had a car accident at the age of 20 and has a lot to say. And she did a lot of interesting digging after she came back and continues to. So I think you guys are going to find this case really interesting. Upon listening to it, though, it seems it doesn't. I'm not 100% sure that she was having an out-of-body experience a lot, too. I think it was going back and forth. So see, I don't know if her heart stopped for much of at least an extended period of time. We'll hear her talk about that a little bit more. I have to brush up on the case myself. It's been sitting in my to-do list for a little while. And I do recall it seemed like she was bouncing back and forth, perhaps between the lower earth astral and a typical NDE experience. And so anyways, let's jump right into this. And I'm looking forward to spending some time with you. Just so you know, after tonight's stream, I'll be over on the Truth in Gaming channel and playing the game Spiritfarer for those who are looking to play Control or watch Control like we were starting. I did have technical issues, as some of you know, and I believe I found a resolution, but I want to make sure. So keep an eye out for that. It looks like I may have to start over, which really sucks, but we will continue that, I promise. Okay, so let's get into this case.
Wheel and we were driving home. It was a long drive on a Friday evening and it was already dark. And the last thing I remember him saying was, "I still have to fill up the gas tank." And there was a gas station outside our village and he had to cross the street. He parked in the forecourt and when he was about to get out, a car came toward us at great speed from the opposite side. And because of a brief confusion on the part of the driver, it very quickly and with full force hit our car from the side, right on the passenger side where I was sitting. The impacting car was thrown 300 meters onto a meadow opposite.
Damn.
In the car sat 3 young men, members of a racing club, but most of them got off with a bad fright. One of them had a broken leg. But our car was catapulted over an iron fence into a garden, whereby a really tremendous bang was to be heard, and there the car came to a stop. But I did not feel anything more of that. Instead, I immediately sunk into unconsciousness during the collision. And when I woke up, I found myself on a kind of strangely high level of consciousness. A feeling of dying was permeating me. It was inconceivable for me that I should die. But this feeling was so pervasive. It was a solemn feeling indeed, an intense feeling that was permeating me, and that also amazed me. Because up to now, it was always only the others that had to die. And at this young age, I hadn't expected that sometime it would be my turn to die, and certainly not at the present moment. But so it was, clearly, and then I felt myself as if I was cut away, fiber by fiber, from what I was closely connected to. Thus being detached from people, from things, from all of my close connections to the world. In the end, my life hung by a thread that was getting thinner and thinner. I was still frantically thinking about how I could ever get into this situation, that I was going to die now, and I heard a piercing, booming noise. So I was dying, and purely logically, I concluded that an accident must have been the reason for this. I could still remember, indeed, my father wanting to refuel, but soon I was no longer interested in the causes of this condition. Instead, a tremendous process was initiated that completely fascinated and absorbed me. I got caught in a maelstrom, a kind of vortex spraying sparks, and I was drawn into a suction that carried me away in a similar way like a rising river. There was nothing that could be done against it.
Find it interesting how she uses like a rising river. You get the water symbolism, kind of.
Rising river. There was nothing that could be done against it. This suction tore me away, and then I was pulled through a dark and narrow tunnel. But
Okay, the one thing I did want to say is with NDEs, most people who experience them already have preconceived notions or perhaps none at all. And so they're not necessarily looking at this realm the way we are. And that causes a bit of an issue, right? As far as our exiting, right? And knowing our intention and our sovereignty is a thing versus having, you know, either many unknowns in your head or preconceived notions about God or various deities, or that, you know, you want to see your loved ones, et cetera, et cetera. So there's different things that are happening for each individual because, like we all know, everything is customized. So it's always important to keep that in mind.
this suction tore me away, and then I was pulled through a dark and narrow tunnel. But that didn't take for long, and I came out on the other side of the tunnel. But inside the tunnel, I heard a booming noise, similar to the sound of bells, but disharmonious. And on the other hand, I suddenly felt completely free and light. And much to my astonishment, I saw myself from above lying in a strawberry patch. At first, I couldn't figure out why in a strawberry patch. And at the time, it was the month of June, and later on, I was able to find the proof that it really was a strawberry patch with ripe strawberries, and so I saw myself lying there, lifeless, and was sure that this was clearly me, because this human being lying down there was wearing a green top, a unique piece that my mother had sewn. And I was a little surprised why I was lying in a strawberry patch. And I noticed people rushing by, completely shocked. And of course, this accident had caused a terrible bang.
I don't know why, but like when I heard her say this, I was thinking how Dan was in the orange farm all alone, the orange grove. But you got to remember, like when the car crashed, she was at a farm. Now, I don't know if we're getting an exact statement, I guess you can say, that it was a strawberry field. But she did say farm, that the car, you know, I think her car landed in the farm or something like that. So I think it would be safe to say that it was probably a strawberry field. And so this is where I'm a little mixed up, right? Like when you listen to her story or her experience, you hear indications where she is like right here in the lower earth astral, looking at, you know, regular surroundings through her, you know, true essence self, her astral body, I guess you can say. And then there's other times where it's obviously she's not in that location. But as you listen to this, it's just keep that in mind, because it got a little confusing for me. And it's really important to decipher the difference of where she is when she's talking about certain things. And that's why it's hard to definitively say really what this was. You're leaning more towards an NDE because you're going to have the hallmarks of some of them, of the conditions. But I get the sneaking suspicion that she was kind of going back and forth. So again, just something to consider when listening to this specific case.
accident had caused a terrible bang. So people were quite hectic and horrified. And this was quite an uncomfortable situation. And then I noticed that I could just float away, what I also liked to do, but right away there was something new again I was faced with. Namely, suddenly my whole life was running before me again at dizzying speed. I relive my whole life again, as in a time lapse, through all stations, from the earliest childhood, with all smells and sounds and sensations and thoughts. It was incredibly fascinating to relive the whole of life so quickly, so vividly, as in a three-dimensional film. And this additionally with a lot of other things, the smells and so on. And so I began to gain an insight into the essence of life at that moment, thereby realizing that the life in our world is comparable to a bobsled running when you don't look either to the left or to the right. You grope your way through the world in blindness, thus forfeiting all sense-giving happenings. And at that moment, the connections were suddenly clear to me in a way that I never would have expected them in my earthly life. The symbol for a worldview came to mind. I had a girlfriend who created worldviews. They have tangled threads at the back and a beautiful picture in front. And that's exactly how it felt to me at that moment. Because when we are part of life, we sometimes are confronted with tangled threads that we cannot necessarily figure out. But now, all of a sudden, I saw the threads on the front of the picture. And this was a picture that was beautiful. And it did make sense. And this made me particularly happy, because before the question of the sense of life had concerned me quite a bit, and now I suddenly could understand that life has a meaning in itself. You don't have to ask about it anymore. Life has a meaning. And going through my life review, it happened almost by itself that I carried out an evaluation.
So here we go again with the life review. I carried out an evaluation. We hear this time and time again. I was judging myself, or I was analyzing my own life. It had nothing to do with any sort of exterior thing or exterior mechanism, should we say. And V and I are on the same page, and I know many of you out there are. It is definitely some sort of AI system. It is automated. It is just certain conditions occur with an individual who is either on the edge of death or experiencing death, or is having something like a breakthrough trip, or all the different other things that we've talked about, the different types that can lead to something resembling an NDE. Or an actual death type experience. And so these things, the only difference that we see is how it is customized to the individual. That we know, but as far as the mechanisms, it's the same thing over and over and over and over again. And it's too perfect for it not to be some sort of technological overlay, technological development that's occurring here. It's obvious. And so what you have to do leading up to and at the time of your natural death is to apply your intention that you're not going to be dealing with this. It's simply not allowed to even enter your being, your essence, so that you take full sovereign control of yourself, right? That's the secret. They don't want you to realize the power you have. They want to keep you distracted, have these attachments. You're going to hear her talk about how she met up with her grandmother who was deceased, and yada, yada, yada. It is the same thing. So having those attachments either here and or for those that have passed, including pets, that's it. Or just a longing to experience this again. Oh, if I could just do it over. You know, if I could just have one more lifetime, I'd do this, and that differently. Well, you're memory wiped. You're memory wiped when you come here. So the wanting to do something again here is not only insanely risky, but the chances of getting what you want, you'll probably get a little bit of it, or you could get none of it. But depending on, I guess, how far along someone wants to take this, right? I mean, I guess if someone is a risk to leaving the system soon, so to say, and I would imagine pretty much everyone here is at the point where they do not ever want to reincarnate again, but perhaps there's a few out there that do want to come back. Just think of it this way. The chance of you being able to do it all over again in a certain kind of way that you're envisioning now is almost certain to not be the case. Because you're not going to have the memory to say, oh, well, you know, I remember I wanted to do something different in that last lifetime. Well, here I am, and that's how I'm going to do it. No, you're not going to have access to that. So, how could this be a learning experience, a growth experience, logical in any sense of the word, if you are memory wiped lifetime after lifetime? It defies logic. It's an insult to our intelligence, really. It's absolute insult.
So I think that every human being has a kind of general guide. And so I felt that what matters is the innermost motivation, the innermost motive of our action and our thinking, but our non-action as well, and the innermost motive, that is love, is an incredibly strong force. And looking back on my life, I also realized that I had been loveless now and then, but also my acting lovingly now and then. I saw that every thought we have, every feeling, everything characterizing us is being sent out by us in the form of waves. And this then triggers joy or sadness around us.
This was huge, right? I mean, this was really big for her to say and to hear that. And she talks about how she spent a lot of time digging into quantum physics. And that's it. I mean, everything is frequency based, wavelength based, however you want to classify it. Which, you know, again, where is all this coming from? What's propping all of this up? What's constituting the construct? And how this all unravels and becomes so. It's technology. It is a very well thought out piece of technology that is cloaked in mystery.
I indeed have regretted a few episodes of them because I saw that I made this or that person sad with something, but I also made people happy with something. All I want is that we are connected with everything that is around us, with all people, and as strongly with everything that is around us, with all animals, with nature, with the whole cosmos. I had the feeling that I am part of the whole vast cosmos, and that I am in inner resonance with it. Also, that I cannot separate myself from it, because I am a part of the whole, and with it, I am connected to everything. And also that everything is connected to everything. And so I became very aware of this then, but all of this was not just a painful self-judgment, because in this life review, I was also able to slip into everyone around me, thereby absorbing their feelings. And as I said, the whole thing was not some terribly painful self-judgment. It was just simply that the eyes are being opened for a deeper truth that was embedded in a forgiving and generous understanding.
Okay, embedded in a forgiveness and understanding. Where's that coming from? Where's that? So you have this mechanism that is setting it up in a way where you are perceiving that you're doing the analyzing, the judgment of your lifetime here in this current incarnation, should you have an experience like this. And yet there's something comforting and reassuring, and there is some sort of frequency that is being blasted onto you to make you think that everything is on the up and up. We can never forget that is great. I mean, I remember looking into this stuff early on and falling for it head first. And I was like, oh my God, everything makes sense now and this and that. But it didn't make sense. I was like, it was just me trying to rationalize in my head the Stockholm Syndrome, right? Like to be able to look at what happens here and then say, oh, well, there is something better when we leave here, right? There is a reason for all of this. And then you start to look at it and you say to yourself, wait a minute. None of this makes sense. Doesn't make sense. We cannot forget that the system that is putting this whole production on, this whole perception game on, is part of the scam. And it is intrinsically linked to Earth. So everything that is going on here, remember, we've talked about this many times. You could fix this place in a heartbeat if you just tweaked the meat suit. That's all you would have to do. You could remove the evil gene, the evil component, the evil programming in human beings. And yeah, maybe you could still have a sensory experience and come and as long as you had full disclosure, lifetime after lifetime. Like, so, maybe you forget when you come here, but then when you die, they say, okay, well, just so you know, if you do want to do this again, your memory is going to be wiped, but when we see you again, we'll let you know, like, okay, if you want to experience it again, this is how this works. So that it reminds you, it tells you. Instead of being able to fall into all of the programming, all the brainwashing that occurs here, all of the attachments that happen, and then subconsciously taking those lessons, those attachments, those that indoctrination, and having it carry over to you just going along with it and not questioning things. There needs to be a realization in between there. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that we initially came here probably in our first lifetime and had a full lay of the land, and we just get lost. Okay, that's what happens. But so it's diabolical in the fact that we lose ourselves and get attached to family and friends and pets and music and various material goods and land and, cars and boats and whatever the heck else people, fall into. And so, it could be anything. Religions, different spiritual beliefs, whatever. Worship, cults, on and on and on. The list is endless. And propping up the system, there's a whole segment of the population out there that just props this all up, and they're lost too, right? But there's comes a point, I think, for all of us somewhere where you just awaken and see right through everything. And I think that's where most of us are. And it is one big, fat, deceptive illusion. But remember, we hold all the cards at the end. And that's the thing that this whole system doesn't want us to realize. Why would it put on such a grand spectacle to keep us brainwashed and subjected to all this crap? Why would it even bother? Why? Unless it knew that at the end of the day, you have control. So for all those out there who doubt that, oh, I don't have the power and this, that. Why put on the grand production? If you didn't have any choice, if you didn't have any say, if you didn't have any way of sticking up for yourself and realizing what this place is all about, why put on the big spectacle? Why? It's pointless. They could just enslave everybody and do whatever they want. They could do everything. It's clear that there are certain things that probably need to be conveyed and played out in this realm for whatever reason that may be. And then of course you have Lush, right? But I mean, if they wanted to make it crazy intense and you had zero power, zero ability to have any say in where you go after this life at natural death, it just defies logic. It really
does. May I come back to the...
So let's get back into it.
Tunnel experience. When you came out of the tunnel, did you then hover over yourself? Yes, the tunnel was the way, and then I was in a way just simply outside, just simply anywhere up there. Did you experience the life review you described while you were still in the tunnel? No, afterwards. Afterwards, I then saw myself from above and was amazed and thereby perceiving the hecticness of people and their fright. I wanted to secretly steal away when I unexpectedly was struck by this life review, although I have to say that some of the time sequence of these episodes can perhaps be interchanged a bit, because everything happened simultaneously, so to speak. But the way I remember, it was that I first saw me from above, and then I saw the life review. You also have interpreted a wonderful worldview out of the woven picture of your girlfriend, and you said that you have understood the meaning of life from it. What insights did you gain from it? I understood that there is a meaning in life itself, but as for me, it had tormented me, and that's why I studied philosophy. But, well, ultimately, it's not mandatory to ask yourself this question, because the question about the sense of life becomes obvious by life itself. Strangely enough, I can't answer what the meaning of life is. I can just say, it is life. Dr. Bless, when you were hovering over yourself, observing the whole situation, could you then also get a glimpse into the spiritual domain? Yes, that followed my preceding impressions, and immediately after the film of life, I met shining figures, and as they got closer to me, I saw that they all were acquaintances, and they also seemed to be distant relatives. Although back then, only one person of my more immediate environment had died, and that was my grandmother, shortly before, and she was exactly the one whom I saw right in the front.
Of course.
And now there she...
Roll out the grandma.
And she was exactly the one whom I saw right in the front. And now there she was, such a wonderful appearance, radiating great happiness and also appearing healthy and youthful. Considering that she had died miserably of cancer a year earlier.
Oh, but everything's a learning experience, right? It's all about love and light and spiritual growth. But, Grandma died miserably of cancer. So, see, I mean, this is when it falls apart. And all the insanity, all the horrors that happen here, all the children that get abused, everything that happens out there, the trafficking and the slave labor of children and adults. I mean, it's just, we can go on and on and on. The vast amount of suffering that happens out there. And that's not to be doom and gloom. That's just the way it is. It's so, it's not being negative and blah, blah, blah. It's just calling it out for what it is. If everything was love and light and everything was, on the up and up, or maybe if there was just a little suffering here and there and it was all part of this experience and we had a full recall after every lifetime about what was going on. Sure, it'd be different, but it is not like that. And most people don't want to face that. They out of sight, out of mind, right? That's the way a lot of people think. Well, it's not affecting me. The starving kids in Africa or the slave camps in China making all the electronics and stuff. No, it doesn't impact me or the clothes. I'm sorry, I'm just going to go off a little bit on a small little tangent, little rant. I saw a channel. What's the name? There's this new site that I guess a lot of Americans and maybe other people around the world are buying from. It's I think Temu, right? Does that sound right? Mimu or Temu, something like that. Anyways, it's apparently some site you can go and buy a bunch of cheap stuff off of. And so some person did a video on it. I almost started recording and doing a commentary on what he was talking about. Anyways, he's saying, oh, well, something like, oh, don't buy from Temu, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay, well, let me see. And I heard about some of the stuff about it where I guess it's crazy with stealing your data. That's one. And two, it turns it into a game, I guess. Temu. It turns, I guess, this whole shopping experience almost like into a game. And you could buy all this cheap stuff. Shop like a millionaire, I think he said. And he's saying, oh, well, but what people don't know is that all the stuff that they are buying on there is from slave labor in China and slave camps. And I'm sitting there saying to myself, this guy makes a video about this site. And I'm just saying, I'm like, well, what about Amazon? What about all this other crap out there? What about all these clothing stores out there? It's all the same stuff. It's all coming from slave labor, probably most of the time. So what is the difference between someone buying it on this Temu site versus buying it on Amazon? It was interesting too because I was scrolling through the comments just to see who would kind of catch like the ridiculousness of this video kind of going at this one site. And I'm not, at all on the side of this site. I don't even know anything about it, but it's just ridiculous because this is happening all over the place. So some person in the comments says, oh, well, same. She's like, oh, I bought art supplies from Amazon and Temu, and they are literally the same exact art supplies. And then someone also said, oh, yeah, they're taking all this stuff from this Temu and various other, probably Alibaba and stuff like that. That site I'm a little bit familiar with. And so they're taking all this stuff and putting it on Etsy and making putting mass quantities out there for cheap. So it's no different. All this stuff is being produced through slave wages, if not like nothing at all, right? I mean, I remember hearing stuff about Nike probably like in the early 2000s. And I think Apple too. Wonder if this video might not last. We'll see. Anyways, things were so bad. There was an investigative team. This is back when there was actually some actual, non-propagandized investigations that occurred out there. And things were so bad in, I want to say like the Apple iPhone store or the Nike. There's a whole documentary about Nike. So I could be mixing them up, but it's either one of the two, and they're both horrible no matter what. So it doesn't matter. One of those two, the conditions were so bad that they set up nets outside the building because the workers in there were so overworked that they wanted to uninstall, and they would jump out the window. What's the difference? What's the difference? There is none. So, anyways, I don't know. I just kind of went off on that tangent a little bit. I saw that video and just like, well, if you're going to bring up that, bring up all the other stuff. I mean, it just felt like maybe perhaps the person that made it was paid to make it. Who knows? Maybe by Amazon or some other site, that was competing with them and lower, and throwing too much competition into the U.S. market. I don't know. But anyways, if you could find that Nike documentary out there, it is really good. It's sad and horrific, but it shows just how deep all this goes, and that everything, and that's just one example out there, and it just shows how contradicted that this whole system is. Everything's about learning and love and light and growth and your spiritual development and, working off that karma and blah, 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 blah. Well, things might be difficult here and there, but, there's a reason for it. You were a mass murderer in your past life. You slayed 20 people, or, maybe you stole Coke bottles and from a garbage and recycle them. I wouldn't be surprised the Matrix put that in someone's life. You see, look, you stole one day. You stole these bottles and, got the 5 or 10 cents for recycling them. We can go on and on and on. I could see crap like that happening. It's just, you can't look at this world through blinders, right? You can't look at it as if none of this stuff is happening. And last thing I'll say on this, something that always stuck out in my mind as a kid, always, was the late night infomercials of Feed the Children. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember that stuff. It's horrible. It's horrible. And it would stick out in my mind, and I'd be like, oh my God, those poor kids, those poor people, and I'm young looking at that. And I'm saying to myself, why is this happening? Why is this occurring? And then, of course, you think about some of you may be familiar with Sam Kinison. He does the comedy bit and says, you're there, feed them. He's like doing the commercial, or he's talking about how the preacher's doing the commercial, Feed the Children or something. And then he's like, don't feed them yet. We got to get the shot. Anyways, this is the insane world. Totally insane. Everything is upside down and inverted and just completely crackpot. It's just ridiculous. All right, let's continue.
So that my mother had taken her to our holy, radiating great happiness and also appearing healthy and youthful. Considering that she had died miserably of cancer a year earlier, so that my mother had taken her to our home in order to care for her, and her protracted debilitation process, her pain and her death had depressed me tremendously. I couldn't figure out what death was. I thought that death might just be a black hole to fall into, or just pure nothingness. I was mourning her very much, and that's why death itself had really scared me. So for half a year, a constant ulterior motive for me was the question of what is death? And just thinking about it, a feeling of oppression came over me. And now that I saw her so full of happiness and radiant and shining, I since have never mourned her. And I was so happy to see her, knowing now that she's doing better there than ever before. That it's all just wonderful, and she is in touch with me, and we were exchanging a ping-pong game of thoughts. The mouth was certainly no longer active, but we could understand each other's thoughts. And so she welcomed me, so to speak, and although I wasn't afraid, she made every effort to show me an even friendlier interpretation or access into the hereafter. And I was very happy to see that. And it wasn't until later in the hospital when I tried again to visualize who all these people were that I had seen there, I realized that they had all been deceased neighbors and so on, including people I hadn't known, but who seemed to be very close to me, probably relatives whom I had never even seen. And in that moment,
So what we have here is the welcome wagon, right? It's how many times have we heard this on NDEs where they're telling us, hey, there's a bunch of, or maybe even just a few individuals that I knew, I remember. In this case, she remembers, obviously, Grandma, because she was 20 years old. Got to keep that in mind. So she probably hasn't experienced much death at that point. I think she even said that. And so Grandma had a horrific death of cancer. But, of course, she mentions neighbors or whoever, individuals she was familiar with. And then there's a subset of individuals who she's familiar with, but can't quite process who those are. I've theorized in the past, and other NDEers kind of, I think, in my opinion, back up my opinion of this, is that I think some of those individuals are other true essence beings that we have, or at least pretending to be true essence beings that we have reincarnated with in the past, in previous lifetimes. That's just a guess. I don't know. The other thing I'll say is that I do not believe, I just do, at this point, after looking at so many cases, I just do not believe that who these individuals are claiming that they're dealing with are who they are. It just, I think it's all part of the program. I think it's all part of the deceptive system. Now, there could be some cases where they are real, but, maybe Grandma could have been real. I don't know. Maybe I'm not discounting that. You got to leave the door open, right? This is just an opinion. I'm not saying it's a fact by any means, but I find it hard to believe that so many people out here have these experiences, and some of them can be interacting with friends or family that have been deceased, 50, 60, 70 years sometimes. That doesn't seem right. Like, I would think there's a good chance that some of those would have likely reincarnated by now, or they're out busy doing their own thing. But for some reason, it's like, oh, well, when this person has an NDE or a shared death experience or something like that, or a breakthrough trip, et cetera, all of a sudden, they're there. A lot. It seems like a program. And there's enough to back up this theory too, because you got to look at it this way. When every single moment of every single day is recorded while we're here, we know that. That's a fact. The life review proves that. Okay. So we know that there is a mechanism out there, wherever, in the matrix kind of overarching system, that is recording all of our lives, everything we say, everything we do, everything we think, from cradle to grave. And that applies to everyone. So if you are sitting on your high horse and thinking of a diabolical system to create, wouldn't it be prudent of you to be able to have access to all this information? You'd have access to what they look like. And mind you, every single situation where there is a deceased loved one or pet or whoever, friend, close friend, someone important to you, in these situations with NDEs, they're never what they were when they were passing, right? So for instance, right here, when she saw her grandmother, grandma wasn't, in her most recent state before she left, filled with cancer and having a lot of suffering. No, grandma was healthy. They're almost always like the pinnacle of health. They're smiling. They're wonderful. Everything's great. Younger, exactly. All that stuff. Why is that? That signifies a deception point. Why is that the case every time? Why? Because it's more relatable. It's something that you would want to see. It's something that I'd want to see. It's something that everybody here would want to see. They don't want to see their loved ones when they were at their worst, on their way out, right? And suffering tremendously. That would be pretty stupid for a parasitic overlord matrix system to implement when you could just rewind the tape a little bit, take a little hologram, insert it into anyone who's having these types of experiences, and everything's great. Grandma's looking healthy, and mom's looking good, dad's looking good, the dog's looking great, the cat, everything's fine. No. Yeah, see, I mean, why is that the case? Again, deception. How could it not be? Again, this is just my opinion, but I don't think who everyone thinks they're dealing with is in fact who they're dealing with. I think the whole thing is a program. And that's because we have open admissions over and over and over and over again that everything is recorded. The Life Review proves it. See, it's just all this stuff is just there comes a point when you just have to really look at it through a fine-tooth comb and say, hey, something's not right here. Why is everything when someone is crossing over or in a state where their life is at severely threatened, or having even like an ego death and like a breakthrough trip, something like that, why are these situations with visitors optimal, and incredible and so relatable and heartwarming? Because it's all part of the program.
And so on, including people I hadn't known, but who seemed to be very close to me, probably relatives whom I had never even seen. And in that moment, I remembered everything. I had heard about death until then, and now I had only a weary smile for such belief, because what I was experiencing was completely different from how I had imagined it based on all the stories, because at that time nothing was known about near-death experiences. Moreover, death was considered to be something terrifying, and at that moment I considered it a great privilege to be able to leave this world at such a young age. And finally, life is also a little hardship every day, along with all the joys. And now I felt no regret at all that I was able to exchange life so early for this fantastic being there in this new dimension, because that was indeed a new dimension. More and more, shall we say, my mind awoke to unexpected abilities. Detached from the fetters of the body, my awareness swung itself up to a multi-dimensionality that one cannot even imagine here on Earth. I could think many clear, crystal clear, deep trains of thought simultaneously, and many questions were arising from inside of me. And when going through this situation, I had a quick flash of inspiration. If only I had been able to do this before at school, solving 20 math problems at the same time. And that's roughly how it felt for me. Then a lot of questions kept coming to my mind, and comparable with Zoom techniques, wherever a question led, I already had been there before, because there were no local or time restrictions. I also was interested in how the universe is structured, and that is something that I have always been interested in. But now I was particularly keen on knowing that, namely in its smallest particles, and I suddenly understood the entire atomic physics at that same instant. And then it occurred to me that I would always have liked to see the Andromeda Nebula, simply because of its beautiful name, and, well, also because it appears in literature, although it is a very distant Milky Way system. But at the same time, I saw the Andromeda Nebula. There were no barriers for me on Earth either. So I thought that I could now go cheaply to Australia.
Okay, so before she continues, I always kind of preface these types of things for those that, have varying different thoughts about space and Earth and all that stuff. Remember, everything is customized to the individual. So this is something that she always wanted to see, right? And she's also going to talk about how she always wanted to go to Australia. And so this is something that her intention desires deep within. And so that's what she's going to get. The customization,
but at the same time,
my friends.
I saw the Andromeda Nebula. There were no barriers for me on Earth either. So I thought that I could now go cheaply to Australia, which it's always been my desire to travel to Australia. But at the time, the airfares were still very expensive. That was beyond the affordable. And really, all of a sudden, I was in Australia. I even think that I saw a kangaroo. And also the time course was just wonderful. It was possible in terms of time to have a look either back or ahead. However, I don't remember future events. But I have in memory that I was able to look into the past for a moment. Above all, I was interested in what it all looked like in the era of the ancient Romans. And in a twinkling of an eye, I saw it. And that was incredibly fascinating. This constant expanding knowledge that no longer has any limits, that was so fantastic, because with this expansion of the mind, I was simultaneously overwhelmed more and more by the deepest feelings of peace, of harmony, of incredible happiness. And then I realized that all of this actually were only accompanying circumstances for the greatest thing that was to come now. I suddenly realized again that I was actually still in the rising river, into which I had felt.
So see, I was already in the rising river. Here we go again with the water symbolism. We've had a scene of a life review, judgment. I mean, it all pieces together right here. I mean, and so we heard her mention water very, very early on in the stream with river of forgetfulness, river Styx, Lethe's water. So interesting, right?
Was to come.
The water symbolism never ends. And there's so much more I'd like to discuss on just the topic of water and the symbology surrounded in the Matrix with it, and how even things like this is a small thing, and some of you may laugh and oh, you're crazy, but this is a common thing with paranormal experiences too. If you look into a lot of paranormal experiences or entity interactions, there oftentimes water can be involved. It acts as a conduit or like a pathway. What's also something that's interesting, it sounds crazy, but it's not when you think about how water plays its role in this whole thing, especially with entities and this being like water being that conduit, like I was saying. The bathroom. A lot of people have paranormal experiences in the bathroom. Well, what do you have? You have a shower and you have a toilet. You have a sink. Water, water, water. And then most people have mirrors in their bathroom too. Mirrors play a role. So you have, so much going on there. Yeah, baptisms. Yep, baptisms in water, as V said. I mean, there's so much. And until you start looking into this stuff and realizing all the different components, like even a lot of the missing cases, a lot of the weird stuff that goes on with that. I recently reached out to David Politis. I really would like to have him on. And we'll see. Maybe he'll come on. But like he does a lot of research into various missing people's cases, right? Now, I have kind of mixed feelings about it, but I think overall, like, he's done an incredible job at showing this stuff, right? And how water plays such a massive role in with the investigations that he's doing. So for any of you who aren't familiar with David Politis, Missing 411, his books are great. Also, he's done a few movies. I'm not going to get into the whole conversation tonight about the things I agree and disagree with, but let's just say I agree with a large percentage of what he talks about. And I respect the effort that he's put in to share everything with people. And there is a clear correlation with missing people in these situations and them being very close to water. Well, why is that? Because it lines up with how other people have paranormal experiences around water, like we were just talking about, in a bathroom, by a lake, by a stream. These things aren't BS. I even ran some experiments through the years with bowls of water. Water divination. Look up some of the stuff with that. Why is water divination a thing? Mirror work, like we were talking about earlier. Dave even put it in the chat too. I mean, it's just this stuff isn't happening over and over and over to so many people for no reason, unless there's a reason for it, because it's a pathway, it's a conduit. So just keep those things in mind. And then we have the water symbolism being conveyed in many experiencer cases like NDEs. This isn't a coincidence, folks. There's a reason for all this. There's answers there. We may not get all the answers, but there's like solid foundations that we can work on and analyze and see how they crisscross with one another, not just here, but also are symbolized outside the body. And there's a massive amount of symbolism in terms of our memories being erased with water, with the symbolism of water, whether it can be in something that could be perceived as an etheric form outside the body, or when you may be here in the physical and perhaps have an out-of-body experience by a stream when you're camping or something, or maybe in the restroom, right? I don't know, right? I mean, these things are there, they're prevalent. They're not. It's not like, oh, they're just a couple cases here, a couple cases there. No, there's a lot. And so you can't just ignore those things and chalk them up to BS unless there's a preponderance of evidence, and there's a lot. So just please keep that in mind. Another thing, for those that may go missing or have paranormal experiences, like, for instance, by a stream or by a lake or by a body of water of some kind, that those that don't go missing but have crazy, wild experiences, they talk about missing time. They talk about how they forget. How much more do we need to throw at the board for it to be a big sign? There's a lot there. Some of it's symbolic, but it's not just symbolic because it's real. It's like there's something like that is just screaming out to everyone saying, hey, pay attention. And there's a lot of data to back it up. It's not, just a small amount. So anyways, I'll stop ranting. Just please don't ever discount the importance of water in all of this and what it symbolizes.
Now, I suddenly realized again that I was actually still in the rising river, into which I had felt drawn from the beginning. This raging river that simply pulled me along, and now I saw the destination of this river, and this was an incredible light, like a sun shining brightly in its powerful sunrise, glistening, bright, but it didn't hurt the eyes. A wonderful, shining, beautiful light, which, however, was not only light, but was moreover radiating an unimaginable, warm love, a personal love. For me, this light was the epitome of the absolute, of the good, of knowledge, of wisdom, of love. And it was so powerful. It actually pulsated out of an energy, a creativity, and also out of an overflowing, unconditional love. And that's what touched me tremendously.
See, it was so powerful. It was tremendous. It was incredible. It was amazing. It was, overpowering. I mean, it's the same playbook over and over and over again. And these are the clues that piece the whole soul trap together.
And that,
or what she said, just a piece of many, many pieces.
That's what touched me tremendously. I will never be able to say or express adequately what this moment was for me. I was inflamed, maybe also in ecstasy, and I was burning with longing to immerse into this wonderful light, into this ocean of love. That's all I wanted. It was indescribable, exhilarating, this experience of love, of light. To get to a better understanding of what you said about being in this rising river that carried.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I do have to take a quick break, and I'll be right back. And I find it interesting. We're going to be talking about the rising river. So we're going to be talking about some water symbolism coming back at you, or back at us, and presenting some truths. So we'll be right back. Just as a reminder, over on the Truth in Gaming channel, I'll be playing Spiritfarer after this stream. So it's scheduled for about 7:30, 7:45. I'm not sure what time we'll kick it off, but it'll be about 10, 15 minutes after the stream concludes. So we're a little more than halfway. Well, about halfway. So much more to come, my friends. I'll see you shortly. Thanks for stopping by tonight. I really appreciate it, and be with you shortly. Just as a reminder, this channel is for educational or perhaps entertainment purposes only, whichever the law would prefer. It's always important to do your own research, come up with your own conclusions. Okay. Okay. So I just want to remind everybody that you can find the channel over on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, where I send out reminders prior to every live stream, or at least most live streams. So if you're looking to get reminders, because Matrix knows that those reminders don't always go out so well, especially on the tube. Although Odysee and Rumble seem to be pretty good at it. And you can also join the channel email list if you'd like. Everything can be found in the description tab. It's a good way for us to stay in touch just in case something happens here on the channel. And Odysee and Rumble are great backups where we multi-stream every stream on all those platforms. And of course, YouTube. So feel free to check those out. And I'd also like to give a big thank you to, I'm a little late at getting to these, but there were some donations made in May that I don't think I got to. I want to give a big thank you to Vladimir and David Rollman, Andrea, and Maria. And if anyone else I may have missed, I apologize. And thank you for everyone who has also joined memberships and supported the channel through Stripe and Stream Elements. It's greatly appreciated. YouTube does take 30%. So it's always appreciated if you could use Stripe or Stream Elements. They do take the least. But memberships are offered on Odysee and YouTube, where you can get some extra content every month, where we do a monthly members live stream, usually on the last Sunday of every month. This month we'll be meeting June 30th, which is Sunday, and that'll be about 7:30 p.m. where we do a deep dive into a topic, and it usually goes quite a while. I try to really give you a quote unquote bang for your buck. And it's a equal exchange of energy, and I try to always go above and beyond for y'all. So it's always appreciated. But we live in tough times too, right? So everyone's struggling out there, and so I understand. And don't expect anything. So it's always appreciated, but never expected. And you can also, even if you like, comment, share, and if you're new, subscribe and hit the bell for all notifications. That helps too. Commenting helps a lot. And of course, liking a video and sharing it helps spread the word. Trust me, these platforms are not doing this channel any favors at all. There was a brief moment there where, there was a little bit of a push, but clearly, since the controlled ops came in and took over the whole thing, the landscape has changed. So mostly anyone who finds out about this channel, it's strictly through word of mouth by individuals like you. And that's about it. So let's get back into tonight's stream and continuing the case. And again, we'll be meeting after the stream if you'd like to join for Spiritfarer over on the Truth in Gaming channel.
wanted. It was indescribable, in ecstasy, and I was burning with longing to immerse into this wonderful light, into this ocean of love. That's all I wanted. It was indescribable, exhilarating, this experience of love, of light. To get to a better understanding of what you said about being in this rising river that carried you away to the light, how has this been shown to you? It rose like a big sun, and it was just in front of me, a fantastic light that attracted me, not only visually, but also emotionally. And it exuded such an ineffable love, but was also conveying knowledge, energy, creative power, everything. It was absolute, so that it was clearly perceptible for me. That's the goal, and I only had a short distance still to cover. And a feeling overcame me, like I am approaching now a threshold, and there I can immerse into this light, or maybe get closer to it. But just at that moment, the further experiencing in these worlds of the good stopped suddenly, and I heard a word that entered my consciousness, and that seemed to me to be 1,000,000 years away, and yet it was my name. I was so amazed. My name. I was gone a long time before, but this. Then I realized that it was my father who was calling my name. I felt panic in his voice, utmost despair, fear. He was calling again and again, Magdalene, 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 and only in special situations did he call me like that.
Okay, so this is the Matrix setup, right? She wants to stay. They always want to stay. And all of a sudden, there is a pipeline from her father to her. Magdalene, Magdalene, come back, come back, come back. You know, we need you. Yeah, just come. All this has happened, and all of a sudden, you know, this pipeline of communication is magically opened. How convenient. Because if they can't guilt trip you, you know, one-on-one or maybe with a group of so-called ascended masters, beings, deceased loved ones, whatever, then they could do something like this where there's like a communication of someone who's on Earth. But remember, they have access to all the information, all the life scripts, and they can transmit it and make it seem 100% authentic. Now, that's not to say that the father wasn't calling out her name. I'm sure he was. Like, you know, I mean, come on, it's his daughter. You know, in a situation like this, I'm sure it's probably being transmitted in real time. But the objective is what we have to keep an eye on. The objective is to get her back to Earth. And that's what they're trying to accomplish, and they will accomplish.
Magdalene,
Obviously.
Magdalene, and only in special situations did he call me like that. Usually, I had a nickname at home, and as if by magic, I listened when I heard this name. I had been raised to do this all my life, and later on, I then was told by some physicians that the ear is the last sense organ that sort of remains intact during the process of dying.
And we've talked about that before too. Hearing is the last thing to go. That seems to be universally accepted. It's talked about by doctors, hospice staff, you know, death researchers. So it does seem to be true. I know a lot of us are skeptical about certain things with modern stuff related to the you know what system, but it's yeah, that it seems across the board uniformly accepted. Makes sense.
Sort of remains intact during the process of dying, at least for longer than the other senses. However, I heard my father calling my name, but I could not see him. And I suddenly got into a dilemma. I felt his fear. I felt so sorry for him, and I wanted to tell him, "It's so nice here." He really panicked, because after a while they found me in this destroyed car, and I was under a seat where I sat in the back of the car. I had slipped under a seat, whereas he had got out of the car, and not seeing me, first off assumed that I had already got out, until he realized that this wasn't the case. However, the helpers came, who had heard this bang, and somehow I was pulled out of the damaged car and laid on this garden bed. And at that moment, I was completely lifeless. I had no more pulse, no more breath, and was totally pallid. And the people said, "She's dead." And my father, as if from his instinct, thought, how should he communicate all this to my mother at home? I'm the only daughter, besides 3 brothers, and it was so terrible for him. And in his panic, he just kept shouting my name. And maybe in doing so, he did the best he could in this situation, even though maybe somehow quite unconsciously, he too really thought that I was dead. And I still wanted to say to him, "Let me go. It's beautiful here. I want to stay here. There's no comparison at all between the life over there with life here on earth. And if you knew that I'm doing so well here and that I'm so happy, then you would let me go for sure." That's what I wanted to tell him, but I couldn't. Between him and me, there was something like a wall. So I realized that I can't tell him anything. I didn't see him either. I just heard him. But apart from that, there was an impenetrable wall between us. And considering this, I got into a dilemma. When imagining that my funeral would be in a few days, and then everyone would cry, because that's what people used to do when a young person has died. So I felt sorry for my relatives, because I wanted them to know that I was fine. But how should they know it? So what should I do now? Wasn't it cowardly if I thus fell into this happiness and the family would be crying afterwards? Who knows for how long? So I really got into a dilemma. And then I thought about trying once again in order to see if I can return again. Because there where I was now, I'd come back anyway. And then, at least, I had tried to return, whether I succeeded or not, but in doing so, I at least would have tried. And in both cases, I would have won. However, with all my strength, with concentrated strength and fortitude, which I was disposing of at this moment anyway, I turned against the flow of this river, and then I reached for a moment of vertex, thereby realizing that this was an important moment, namely the decisive moment for the one side or the other. And this was only for one moment, and it was incredibly exciting. And as you can see, I fell to the earthly side. And this meant really a fall, like falling down from great heights. And all these lucid trains of thought that I still had just now were blurred, and this wonderfully glowing light of love that had so fascinated me had gone out. And the thought process became more and more confused, and were put into a dark, flat, dim state. And then I felt a jolt and realized, now I'm back in my body. As a matter of fact, I had completely forgotten my body in the meantime, but now I could feel it again with all of my senses, especially its heaviness. We are constantly carrying so much weight around with us. Normally, you aren't aware of it, but at that moment, of course, I felt the weight. And of course, I also felt some pain, but what horrified me most was the shadowy, dim, one-dimensional thinking that we have here. All the power of knowledge was over. And then it was clear to me that from now on, I had to live on only with this little bit of thinking and feeling. The whole great glow being gone, and I was so disappointed at that moment that I simply plunged into unconsciousness again, but without inward experience. And after a while, when coming to my senses, I found myself lying in a rocking vehicle, and a friendly person who was doing his duty and who saw that I was waking up asked me, "What's your name? And what health insurance do you belong to?" And then I really had to laugh. The earth had me back. How bad were your injuries in that car accident? Well, I had a lot of fractures from top to bottom of my body, from a skull fracture to 3 pelvic fractures, and a lot of bruises and muscle tears. My eyes were full of glass splinters, but actually the most dangerous thing was a contusion, or how shall I put it, a contusion of my kidneys, because back then the cars had a kind of armrest on both sides of the rear seats, and that's why today cars are no longer equipped with that. And because from the right where I was sitting, this other car crashed into it with full force. So these armrests hit my kidney area, and that, I think, caused a body shock. Because when you are young, you can survive a lot of physical injuries, fractures, and external wounds and all that, but everything heals again. But the dangerous thing was this shock, by which some of my inner organs were just cut off from any further supply. And the countershock came from my father, but I was still in a critical state for 3 to 4 days because some psychological processes were no longer working. But thereupon, everything gradually returned to normal. Well, it was primarily this body shock that was life-threatening. And then your recovery was progressing well. Yes, but it actually took a few months. That in any case, several months, but then it went well again, of course. What impact did this near-death experience have on your future life? Well, in the first moment when I got to the hospital, where I was staying for quite a long time, I was incredibly euphoric, even though the outer conditions did not suggest this. But still, the first disappointment was overcome very quickly, and I considered it a tremendous gift to be able to live again without this constant fear in the background. What does it mean to be dead? Where do we go? And so on. And this is a fear probably entailing even more fears. And this fear was gone. And I was so happy about this gift of life that for weeks I had been euphoric, so happy, so cheerful, that the people who came to visit me used to ask me, "Have you been given morphine, or what's on with you?" But of course, this was not the case. I just was very happy. And I was accommodated in a 6-bed room in the hospital, and people constantly had been brought into my room, those who had attempted suicide, because I was someone who considered life to be so beautiful. So this insight has really remained with me, namely that life is a tremendous gift, a gift that cannot at all be taken for granted, with all its ups and downs that are brought about by life. But after each depth, there are highs again. And all in all, life is a tremendous gift, and it fills me with great awe and with great respect. I'd say that I do not know how I would have developed without this experience, but as a whole, I have to say that afterwards I had more intensive relationships, for example, with nature, with plants, or with nature in general, and with what happens in nature, and I was also more affectionate toward life. And life fulfills me with an incredible awe.
Now, see, this is something, I've talked about a little bit. It's something I experienced. It's all encompassing. And there is a component to nature, and I'm not talking about the vile sides of nature. I'm talking about the positive sides of nature, where things can open up to you. You can see and experience incredible things and interact with things in nature that would otherwise be considered crazy or ridiculous. But for me, it was a big part of my awakening process to realize some of that, it's not just humans that have the lay of the land or the animal kingdom or what have you. There is a lot more going on here than we have been led to believe. And that includes natures. That includes trees and the grass and the flowers and the birds and the bees and et cetera, et cetera. Everything goes much deeper, but we can't get a firm explanation of everything. But my suspicion is, and I've talked about this a few times, and I'm not going to rant on about it too much, but like something that stands out to me is, I believe it's in the Vedic literature. I could be wrong, but or the Tibetan. But anyways, how I think, and it makes sense. Like we may come here initially and be like an observer, like something like a leaf on a tree, or a fish, or a worm, or a bird, or a butterfly, or a gorilla, or whatever, right? And then eventually, like, continue to move up and up and up in quote unquote awareness, or fragmented awareness, more like it, to the point where we eventually become human and go throughout that process. My suspicion is, and I'm not 100% sure because there's no way to prove this. There are no experiencer. Well, let me put it this way: there are some who have made claims, but very, very few, about being in animal states or in like a leaf on a tree or a tree. Like, I mean, there are some out there, very, very few. But you can't take those because there's not a plethora of data and say, oh, well, definitively, that's something to go off of and to reaffirm what I'm going to say. Because I just, again, it's all about the numbers. It's all about the data patterns that you can like fall back on and have some semblance of sanity with, not just saying things to say things. But my suspicion is, and again, this is opinion, I believe that if this system was smart, and it is, it's really well thought out, then why wouldn't it have you come and experience existence from a different perspective through things like being a tree, or being a leaf, or being a blade of grass, or being a flower, or, being a worm, like slowly working you into the fabric of forgetfulness and attachment to a familiar scene, which is the earth realm, or perhaps other realms that are linked in the overarching matrix system. It's a smart approach if you think about it, right? Warm you up. Things aren't so horrible, right? I mean, if you're a leaf on a tree, or a flower, or a blade of grass, your lifespan could vary. I mean, like, if you're a tree, you could potentially live a long time. But what is that state of existence? Is that state of existence comparable to something like a human? I don't know. Probably not. If I had to guess. Just like how some, I mean, this is far out there, right? I mean, it's far out there, but it's just something to consider. And so why wouldn't they kind of ease you into all this, or ease us into all this, and have us go through varying states of existence, and then kind of leading us to quote unquote the top, which is the human form, where, like, you know, you get the full spectrum traumatic experience, you know, the pain and suffering experience. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, if I was some evil, diabolical overlord of the Matrix, I think that would be a hell of an approach. And there are some, you know, spiritual, you know, documents out there that suggest that something like that does occur. You know, whether it's true or not, I don't know. But it makes sense when you look at it from a diabolical Matrix overlord perspective. That's all I'm saying. You know, you get lost easier. Things aren't so bad when you're a leaf on a tree or a flower. And then things might get a little dicey when you're a worm. You know, a bird's going to snap you up. But then you could become a bird. Then you could become a fish. Then you could become a whale or a chimp or a whatever, you know? And like they slowly ease you into it. And then by the time you've gone through all those different phases, and you could even just be a spirit being whizzing around the lower earth astral, an orb or something. I don't know. Who knows what the progression is and how that all works, or if the progression even exists in the first place. But these are things that kind of need to be thrown on the table as because this system does think of everything. And if you look at it from a logical perspective, it makes sense. Can you prove it? No. Can I prove it? No. It's just something to consider as a possibility. That's all. So let's get back into this.
Always look at it anew as a miracle, and this same fear of death is gone. On the contrary, in secret, I feel a pleasant anticipation of death, because the prelude was so wonderful that the concert to follow someday will be even more beautiful. Well, of course, then earthly life gradually became more and more easy to bear. I don't think about my near-death experience every day, but yet for me, it is an inner consolation in all situations in life when recapitulating that, because then I felt happy. And what has possibly been sharpened by this is a certain intuition, maybe also a more distinct empathy into other people that I did not have before to this extent. Also a feeling that we all belong together, that we are interwoven with everything, with the whole universe, with the whole humanity, with everything. And furthermore, I now have some interests that are very pronounced in me. Although I then became an historian, I studied history, but nevertheless, natural sciences, and above all, quantum physics, have always been of great interest to me. Quantum physics and philosophy are related areas of frontier sciences, docking at each other, one field of this science merging into the other, and that fascinates me immensely. Because I think with models like this, one can better decipher the mystery of the universe. Maybe never completely, yet I'm simply interested in it. And also in astronomy, for example. And what has also remained is a strong interest in mysticism. namely in the great old mystics, as they are known by Christianity and also by Islam, as is Hildegard von Bingen and Rumi. These are the authors I have intensively read.
Rumi's good read. Good read. Highly suggest checking it out.
Hildegard von Bingen and Rumi. These are the authors I have intensively read, but also other authors, because I think that I sometimes discover texts in mysticism that are very similar to a near-death experience.
Okay, so this is a massive truth bomb right here, and she's like having insane realizations about things that I also kind of came to conclude. And she's right. I mean, if you look at a lot of these spiritual texts, doesn't matter what it is, you hear certain things that are so out there that you couldn't help but like listen to them through a modern lens of today and say to yourself, well, did they have an NDE, or did they have an OBE, or were they, did they pick up some mushrooms in the forest or something? Like, there's so many interesting accounts of things like this, but it's crazy because when you're going through that stuff when you're younger and not looking at it through that lens of that is quite frankly logical, like an NDE, like an OBE, like someone picking up mushrooms in a forest or whatever, right? It's hard, like you're not piecing it together when you're younger. Or maybe you are, I don't know. Maybe some of you have. I mean, there's some really smart people out there who have been following since they were very young and are just like in tune with a lot of this stuff. I wasn't one of them. Like, it took me a long time to like process and go through all this and reach like seeing through this and going through various spiritual texts and saying, wow, there is a lot of truth there, or there's a lot, or this person is clearly having an NDE. NDEs aren't new. OBEs aren't new. Tripping out and having breakthrough trips is not new. All this stuff it's out there. You just have to find it. But like the craziest part, well, not the craziest part, because this whole thing is basically like a crazy supercomputer, is that you see the patterns. You see them. And you see, the tunnel and the light and the interacting maybe with deceased loved ones or who they perceive to be God or some spiritual deity, and on and on and on. It's the same thing. It might be worded a little off or a little different, but what you're hearing is the same exact mechanism. Why is that? How long has this been going on? And, I've theorized before, and, I mean, you can't prove it, but I think there's a lot to back it up out there, is that, what this system does is it resets itself. It builds up to a certain point, and then when the matrix is not comfortable, it destroys it. And this could be regional, this could be realm-wide, I don't know, or could be a combination of the both, depending on where, quote-unquote, the threat level would be for individuals like you and I to become aware of what this matrix is trying to sell. Too many start to become aware of, quote unquote, the BS and start asking big questions. And there must be a certain threshold percentage where that comfort level is being exceeded, and what do you call it? Some sort of automatic program goes off and starts flooding the realm or the region, or zips out technology, so it's inaccessible. One of the things we hear about all the time is the Library of Alexandria. Well, you know where the Library of Alexandria is in modern times? Archive.org. That is the modern day Library of Alexandria. Everything is, the whole romanticizing of the Library of Alexandria. It sounds cool, right? And I bet there was a lot of interesting information there, and that the Vatican probably stole, and various other organizations with hats and all that stuff. But we have a modern connection to archive.org. And it kills me that site is in the crosshairs. Mark my words, my friends. Whatever you want off archive.org right now, go get it. There is some legal cases going on right now. I've been meaning to make a separate video on it. I don't know if I'll ever do it, but I'm just trying to say it right now. It is a plethora of information, completely uncensored. You can find almost anything on there. There are some situations, especially with more modern books, where like if you would need your library card. So if go to your local library, get a library card, and you can work a way to get a book out of that website and download it. Okay, but there is tons and tons of information at your fingertips on that website, and it's been around forever. It's part of the Wayback Machine. I'm sure many of you have heard of that, right? But a lot of people don't know. It's not just like, oh, you can put in a web address and find a website from 20, 25 years ago. It's much more than that. It's like there's a whole database of books and images and audio files and video files that stand the test of time since the internet has basically been conceived. It is... I've supported the site. I send a donation every year, and I highly recommend anyone who uses it to also send a donation. It's a heck of a site. It's an invaluable resource, and it's being attacked right now. It is under attack, and it is the finish line, like of the system to be able to take that away from us. An invaluable resource. It can never be replaced. If they lose in court and they get gutted of their money, and they can't support the server costs. I mean, and I won't even want to know how much it costs to support that website, because it's got who knows? Could be millions, multiple millions a year. Maybe it's even in the close to $1 billion. It can't be $1 billion, but it's got to be multiple millions of dollars a year to support that website. It has to be, just by the sheer volume of information that you can access. You have it available to you. The problem is, you got to do some finagling with the search, and there is no algorithm or anything like that. What you search is what you get, like the old days. Either it's there or it's not. Try varying degrees of spelling and everything like that. I highly, highly suggest checking out that website for your own personal research, and really, if something happens to that site, and I'm sorry, the writing's on the wall. Something's going to happen. Just to kind of give you an overview of what occurred. So during the whole thing that happened a few years ago, we all know that it goes unmentioned name-wise, but the whole thing where you had to put where they tried to tell us to do things and inject all that stuff. When that happened, what Archive did, I'm not going to talk much longer about this, I promise. But what happened was the site started to allow. So the way the site's always worked is like, okay, if you want to check out a book as if you're going to a library, you would link your library card and you were able to borrow a book online. Well, what it did is when that whole thing happened, they said, okay, we're changing the rules and we're going to allow, because there's so many people at home, we're going to allow everyone to check out, multiple copies of a book. But copyright law is set in a way where, if you go to a library, right? Just think about it. Makes sense. If you go to a library and check out a book, if that book isn't available, you have to wait until that book is returned in order to check it out. But because they digitized everything and scanned every page and made these books available, they said, hey, well, because everyone's at home and everything, all this crazy stuff's going on, we're just going to, leave it wide open. All you have to do, you have to check out the book, but we're going to allow multiple copies to be out at one time. So even though they may have, let's say, 2 copies of any said book under current modern copyright law available in their database that they have purchased and can prove they purchased, we're going to allow infinite numbers of people to take out that book. From a copyright perspective, and the fact that they even did it is insane, which led me to think that it could have been on purpose. It seems completely off the charts stupid that something like that would even be allowed to happen, given that they have been doing this for over 2 decades. Which, really, it makes you wonder, like, is the whole thing purposely happening so that the entire website could be gutted and removed? There's a lot of stuff on that website, not just books and videos and music and PDF files, but there is old websites that, the parasites that they are don't want seen. That's just the way it is. And to me, it seems so stupid. I mean, this is a company that's been around, a nonprofit organization that's been around for so long that they should have known better during that time to do something like that. Now, you can look at it, we can look at it and say, oh, that's a noble thing that they did. So, like, everyone's at home and that they're just kind of offering unlimited lending of books when their database, they only have 1 or 2 copies. So in theory, like, you go to a library, if the library has 2 copies, those 2 copies are there. You go, you take it out, someone else goes and takes out another. Then, if person number 3 goes to the library, those books are not available until someone returns them. And that's the same concept of how archive.org worked until the whole thing a few years ago. And that has set off a firestorm of lawsuits by book publishers. I don't know if they'll recover from it. And so I'm just putting it out there and just saying, support them if you can. They are just the last bastion of free and open information. But at the same time, I don't know. I mean, it seems so stupid what they did. And maybe they had a mole or someone come in there and give them horrible advice. I don't know what happened, but it just seems off. So it's like when I'm saying, like, hey, go and support them or something, throw them a few bucks. But at the same time, I'm like, is this all designed? I mean, they can get absolutely pummeled in court. They're in the wrong. That's all there is to it. They're in the wrong. I don't know how they get around it. So anyways, I'm rambling. It's just, it really pisses me off because you can find Christ, I've looked up all sorts of weird shit and ran across weird stuff. You can find schematics on how to build a freaking javelin from the 1600s on there. There's so much stuff. You can find things that have been deleted off YouTube many, 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 many years ago. You can find full-length backups of all that information. It is there's nothing like it. It is the modern day Library of Alexandria. And who knows what's gonna happen in the next couple of years. It could be gone. There's a very real chance that it could happen. So, anyways, I'll stop ranting.
Sometimes discover texts in mysticism that are very similar to a near-death experience, and I think the mystics have experienced something similar. This brief merging with their divine core, and that's what it's all about. Mysticism is the secret stream that feeds all religions, the major religions, and these are the interests having remained in my mind, probably being reinforced by this experience, but also the feeling of having responsibility for each other. And but yet, I'm therefore not a perfect person. A human is just only a human. You had this near-death experience in 1968. Was it already known at that time that such near-death experiences existed? No, not really, not at that time, and not in a wider range. I, at any rate, had never heard of it back then. So I then realized that I couldn't tell anyone about it, even though first I tried by saying to the people in the hospital, I died and now I'm back. But they waved it off by means of the words, yes, it's okay, you'll be all right. But nobody took it seriously. But then I felt that no one understood what I wanted to make them understand, and no one was interested in it either. They probably thought that I was somehow mentally confused or something like that, whereupon I didn't tell anyone for years. But I immediately wrote this experience down after a few days in a large notebook when I was still in hospital. I still have this notebook, so that I will never forget anything of it, because I knew that this was the top experience of my life. But at the moment, I couldn't tell anyone, because I have the impression that no one is open to it. And so it has been going for years. And I also had thoughts as regards people who would be laughing about this or not taking it seriously if I told of it, and what would hurt me, because this experience is so precious to me that I just kept it to myself now, because I'm afraid that otherwise people would consider me a bit crazy. But then, 7 years later, this first book by Raymond Moody was launched, who was the first to collect near-death experiences with a whole series of examples, and who had shed light on the subject for the first time. There were indeed already a few books before. One author of them just comes to my mind, a certain author who could formulate this well. He was a psychiatrist, and his book is titled Longing for Over There, or something like that. And he had already written this book on this topic shortly beforehand, but it was not as widely known as Moody's book, which then immediately was translated into many languages and had a media echo. And soon many books on the subject were launched. And now there's a lot of books and research on this topic. But this book by Moody broke the spell. And this relieved me indeed when realizing that this is not my own personal and individual experience, but that it's a general human experience that people in this near-death situation can have if they remember it, and that ever runs according to a certain scheme. Maybe this element...
A certain scheme. That's a good wordage.
never runs according to a certain scheme. Maybe this element or that is missing sometimes, but all in all, these experiences are amazingly similar, and it relieved me a lot being aware of this, because I then felt that I myself wasn't crazy to that extent, but rather that I had gone through a general human experience.
Okay, I do got to cut it off there for copyright purposes for music, but I mean, it's that's pretty much it. So, we will be headed on over to the Truth in Gaming channel if you'd like to join. And I want to thank everyone for stopping by. Please consider hitting the like button on the way out. I'd really appreciate it. It would help a lot. And if you do stick around, you'll be automatically sent to the Truth in Gaming channel right after this. And there'll be about a 10-15 minute delay between this stream ending and when we start the Truth in Gaming channel. We're going to be going into Spiritfarer. It's the first time I've ever played it. I've had it on my list for a while. I think some of you may enjoy it. It does seem like an interesting one. It's about releasing spirits to the afterlife, learning to say goodbye, and what would you leave behind. So, seems interesting. It's an afterlife game, so falls right in line, and we'll see what happens, right? So, thanks everybody. Really appreciate it. Thanks Ryan. Thanks Terry, Roxana, Casey, and Chris, candidly, Ryan, I said Ryan, Paul, everybody else out there. And thank you to all the members for supporting the channel. I greatly appreciate you. And I think we had some problems on Rumble tonight. I want to thank Rolling Water, How They Fairchild, and Sly over on Odysee. We'll see each other again soon. And thank you so much. Much love. Take care of yourselves, all right? Don't work too hard. We'll see each other again sometime soon. Thank you.